There's a quiet tension at the heart of modern life. Many people go about their days feeling as if they are always reacting to expectations, to systems, to a momentum that's already in place. Decisions are made, schedules are adhered to, responsibilities are fulfilled, yet beneath it all, a subtle uncertainty lingers, whose life is truly being lived, not in a dramatic way, but in the more subtle ways that direction is shaped over time. A self-directed life is often envisioned as total freedom, the ability to do whatever one desires, whenever one wishes. However, in reality, freedom without some form of structure can lead to a sense of drifting. Conversely, structure without reflection can gradually turn into mere obedience. Thus, the question is more complex than just autonomy. It revolves around whether an individual has cultivated an inner relationship with their own direction, one that is aware enough to differentiate between what has been actively chosen and what has merely been inherited through habit, pressure, or routine. Much of modern life is structured around speed. Decisions are made swiftly, paths are embarked upon early. Reflection often occurs only afterward, if it happens at all. Over time, this can lead to a peculiar situation where a person becomes highly effective in life they never truly examined. There can be competence without connection, movement without a sense of authorship. People learn to navigate complexity, but not always how to question whether that complexity is genuinely theirs. Perhaps this contributes to the deeper exhaustion many experience. It's not just that life is demanding, but that the demands have piled up more quickly than self-awareness can keep pace. The external structure becomes increasingly intricate, while the internal relationship to it remains vague. In such a state, even success can feel oddly remote, not because it lacks worth, but because the individual experiencing it doesn't fully see themselves within it. Today's discussion aims to take a moment to reflect on our experiences. It's not about dictating the perfect way to live, but rather examining what makes life feel authentic, what enables someone to navigate the world with a sense of purpose that comes from within, rather than being shaped by outside influences. Maybe self-direction isn't about making bold declarations of independence. Perhaps it's something more subtle, the gradual process of staying engaged with one's own life as it unfolds. When you look at how many people navigate through modern life, whether it's work, ambition, social expectations, or even their own identities, what do you think makes true self-direction so challenging on a personal level? It's not just that people lack choices. Rather, it feels like much of contemporary life is prepackaged, leaving little room for personal reflection. I'm interested in your thoughts on whether this struggle stems from external pressures or something more subtle, the slow erosion of our ability to tell apart what we've actively chosen and what we've passively absorbed over time.
I believe the challenge starts long before most people realize they are making choices about their direction. Many frameworks come into play quietly and early on. Concepts of success, usefulness, identity, and stability are often passed down without much scrutiny. By the time someone begins to consciously reflect on their life, they might already be entrenched in patterns they never actively selected. And since these patterns are reinforced by society, they seldom feel forced upon us, they seem normal. This is part of what complicates self-direction. The lack of overt pressure creates a sense of freedom, even when much of our movement is still influenced by external factors. Then there's the issue of pace. Contemporary life offers very little uninterrupted time for reflection before taking action. Decisions are made swiftly because our environments reward quick responses. Educational paths, career aspirations, and social roles often unfold in rapid succession, with little time to pause in between. As a result, momentum can replace clarity. People keep moving because it feels easier than stopping to question their direction. Once momentum builds, it can be psychologically challenging to break. Even when uncertainty lurks beneath the surface, comparison also plays a crucial role. Individuals are constantly exposed to visible images of how life should be, what progress looks like, what fulfillment means, and what types of achievements are deemed significant. Over time, this leads to a subtle internal adjustment. Desire itself becomes more difficult to interpret. Someone might feel drawn to something without fully understanding if that attraction stems from genuine alignment or simply from repeated exposure. The line between aspiration and imitation blurs. And since external validation is immediate while internal clarity takes time to develop, external cues often hold more weight. Another factor is the comfort of following inherited paths. Uncertainty can be quite challenging. Taking a serious look at one's life often involves facing ambiguity, contradictions, and the unsettling thought that some choices may not truly feel like one's own. Sticking to familiar routines can seem safer than stepping into that uncertainty, even if those routines gradually lead to a quiet sense of dissatisfaction. Many people become remarkably adaptable. They figure out how to navigate systems, meet expectations, and stay productive. However, being adaptable doesn't always equate to being self-directed. A person can excel in a life that still feels somewhat disconnected. This sense of distance often doesn't make a grand entrance. It creeps in quietly during moments of reflection, times of fatigue, or in the odd sensation of achieving things that no longer resonate with the self experiencing them. I believe that true self-direction demands a kind of ongoing inward focus that our modern world doesn't readily promote. It's not about rebellion or retreat. It's about being willing to stay aware of how one's path is shaped as life unfolds. Without that awareness, it's all too easy to adopt an entire way of living without ever truly questioning whether it reflects a life that feels genuinely lived from within.
Do you think most people realize when they're no longer truly in control of their own lives? Or does that understanding often come later, in subtle and less obvious ways? From an outsider's perspective, someone can seem very capable, productive, responsible, even successful, while internally, they may feel increasingly disconnected from their own choices or desires. I wonder if this misalignment often lurks beneath a facade of competence, and if many individuals mistake mere activity for true alignment simply because their environment continues to reward them for moving forward.
I believe that often, the realization comes in a very quiet way. It's not a dramatic collapse, but rather a slow build-up of disconnection that becomes hard to ignore over time. A person can still function well while feeling this disconnection, which is why it often goes unnoticed for years. Being competent can hide a lot. Someone might keep meeting expectations, advancing in their career, and handling responsibilities, while everything seems fine on the surface. In fact, the more capable someone is, the easier it is to miss whether their path still feels meaningful to them. Modern life often values progress over reflection. As long as there's movement, there's little pressure to question where it's all heading. Productivity can feel reassuring, creating the illusion that everything is working, even when something deeper feels increasingly distant. Misalignment often shows up in subtle ways. It might not be obvious unhappiness, but rather a persistent numbness. Experiences may no longer feel fully engaging. A person can go through their daily routines efficiently, yet feel a lack of genuine presence. Sometimes it manifests as fatigue that rest alone can't fix, or as a struggle to feel real excitement for things that once mattered. There might also be a quiet emotional dullness where achievements happen, but they don't resonate internally as expected. The challenge is that these signs are easy to rationalize. People often think they're just temporary or simply part of growing up, taking on responsibilities, or pursuing ambitions. And since those around them may be experiencing similar feelings, it becomes normalized rather than questioned. I also think many people mistake familiarity for alignment. If a structure has been around long enough, it starts to feel like a given. A person might not actively choose to be part of it anymore. They just keep going along with it because it has woven itself into their identity. Questioning it can feel unsettling, as it's not just about changing course, it's about rethinking who one has become within that course. This realization often hits during moments of interruption, times when the usual flow slows down a bit. A shift, a moment of quiet, an unexpected break, or even sheer fatigue. In those instances, the person isn't as tightly bound by routine, and something softer becomes noticeable. It's not always a straightforward answer, but rather a recognition. A recognition that being effective and feeling aligned internally aren't necessarily the same. I believe that distinction matters, as many individuals spend years perfecting the framework of their lives without questioning whether that framework truly reflects something authentically lived from within. The challenge isn't just external expectations. It's that drifting can seem surprisingly organized. It can appear responsible, disciplined, and successful while still harboring a sense of disconnection from one's own narrative. That's why self-direction often starts not with an immediate overhaul of one's life, but with a commitment to being honest about whether one feels truly present in the life they already lead.
When someone starts to engage with their life more consciously without necessarily making drastic external changes, but by paying closer attention to what feels truly chosen versus what seems inherited or automatic, what internal shifts do you notice first? I'm curious about those initial changes that might not be visible on the outside yet begin to transform how a person perceives their own choices, responsibilities, or sense of purpose.
What often changes first is not action, but how we perceive things. A person starts to realize how much of their life has been driven by momentum instead of a conscious connection. Patterns that once seemed neutral begin to stand out. Commitments, routines, and even goals start to feel different when looked at more closely. Not necessarily wrong, but less automatic. There's often a heightened awareness of internal conflict. Small moments arise where the body or mind hesitates before moving towards something it would have previously accepted without a second thought. A conversation, a responsibility, a goal, things that used to blend seamlessly into daily life start to reveal whether they feel energizing, draining, imposed, or truly meaningful. And this awareness can feel uncomfortable at first. Once someone notices a misalignment, it becomes hard to go back to living unconsciously. The external structure may stay the same, but internally, there's now a clear difference between what feels genuinely lived and what feels merely maintained. Another early change is the slowing down of reactive decision-making. People begin to take a moment longer before saying yes, before committing, before automatically moving toward what's expected. Not out of rebellion, but because they're starting to question their own authorship. Do I really want this? Becomes a more frequent internal question, even if it's not always answered clearly. This pause is important because much of modern life is about immediacy. Quick decisions are often rewarded for being fast and adaptable. But when someone starts to engage with their life more consciously, speed loses some of its power. Reflection begins to seep into areas that were once ruled by momentum. There's also a subtle shift in emotional sensitivity. A person might start to realize that some types of exhaustion aren't just physical. Some fatigue arises from following paths that no longer resonate internally. Conversely, there are times when even challenging work can feel surprisingly light because it aligns with one's personal values. This shifts the way we relate to effort itself. Effort doesn't feel significant just because it's hard. It starts to matter whether that difficulty stems from something that feels truly chosen. Over time, the line between performance and coherence becomes more apparent. Performance often focuses on external factors. It considers how one is perceived, how one measures up against others, and whether progress is visible. Coherence, on the other hand, is more subtle. It relates to whether the inner and outer aspects of life feel connected. Many people find that they've spent years honing their performance while overlooking coherence. Thus, the initial phases of self-direction are often less dramatic than one might expect. There may not be immediate life changes or visible transformations. Instead, there's a slow reorganization of focus. A person becomes more attuned to where their energy contracts, where it expands, what feels nourishing, and what is merely sustained by habit. Perhaps most crucially, there's an increase in willingness to embrace uncertainty. Once inherited structures are examined honestly, clear alternatives don't always emerge right away. There can be times when a person no longer fully identifies with their old path, but hasn't yet defined a new one. That space can feel delicate, yet it holds significance. It's often the first moment a person engages with their life, not primarily through expectations or momentum, but through sustained inward reflection. Over time, that reflection begins to subtly reshape the entire way direction is experienced.
What do you think is the biggest misconception about living a self-directed life? Often, people equate it with total freedom, independence, or even a complete break from any kind of structure. However, I wonder if that view is a bit too simplistic. Perhaps self-direction isn't just about rejecting all influences, but rather about cultivating a mindful relationship with the various influences that already shape our lives. What do you believe people often misunderstand about what it truly means to live in a self-directed manner?
I believe one of the biggest misconceptions is that self-direction equates to complete independence. There's a romantic notion that living a self-directed life means being free from obligations, influences, or any kind of structure, that it's all about living entirely on your own terms. However, that's not how human life operates. We are constantly shaped by our relationships, environments, responsibilities, and the social realities around us. So, self-direction doesn't mean a lack of influence. It's about being aware of the influences that exist. This distinction is important because when people envision self-direction as total freedom, they often feel let down by the reality that every life comes with its own set of constraints. Responsibilities persist, external systems are always present. Certain compromises are simply unavoidable. As a result, they may conclude that true self-direction is unattainable, perhaps because they were defining it too rigidly from the start. Another common misunderstanding is the mix-up between rebellion and true authorship. Initially, rejecting expectations can feel liberating, but just pushing back doesn't necessarily lead to clarity. A person might spend years reacting against established structures without ever gaining a deeper understanding of what truly resonates with them. Reactivity is still a form of dependence. The direction is still being influenced from the outside, just in a way that opposes rather than complies. True authorship is much quieter. It involves gradually learning to identify which influences align with one's core values and which are simply inherited, performative, or driven by fear. This discernment often unfolds slowly, through reflection rather than through dramatic changes. I also think people often underestimate the importance of structure. There's a tendency to equate freedom solely with openness, as if the ideal life is one without limits, routines, or commitments. Yet, without some form of intentional structure, a person can easily drift just as much as they can feel constrained. A self-directed life is not formless. The text discusses the concept of architecture in a way that emphasizes conscious relationships over passive inheritance. It suggests that while routines and obligations may not decrease, they can feel more interconnected. A common misconception is that self-direction should bring certainty. Many people believe that once they achieve true alignment, decision-making will become straightforward and conflicts will vanish. However, self-direction often heightens awareness of complexity rather than eliminating ambiguity. When external influences lose their grip, individuals must pay closer attention to subtler forms of understanding, which are rarely definitive. This process demands patience, reflection, and the ability to embrace uncertainty without rushing to escape it. Another misunderstanding is viewing self-direction as a final goal. It's not about reaching a state of complete authenticity and staying there forever. In truth, maintaining direction requires continuous effort, as circumstances shift, values change, and outside pressures re-emerge in our lives. Thus, self-direction is more about the relationship we cultivate with our choices than a fixed destination. It's an ongoing process of being aware of the origins of our actions. Importantly, many people overlook how quiet this journey can be. It doesn't always manifest dramatically. Sometimes, it's reflected in subtle changes: a slower decision, a more genuine conversation, or the choice to step back from something that no longer resonates internally. While these adjustments may seem minor on the surface, they can profoundly transform one's inner experience. The most significant shift often lies not in what one does differently, but in the realization that life is not just being managed or performed, but truly lived from within.
When the direction of our lives shifts away from pressure, expectations, or comparisons, and instead comes from a deeper sense of internal clarity, how does that transform our experience of life? Initially, this change may not be visible on the outside, but it can profoundly affect how we feel about our decisions, how we perceive time, and the internal tension we carry as we navigate through everyday life.
One of the initial shifts is a decrease in the need for internal negotiation. When someone navigates primarily through expectations or comparisons, there tends to be a constant underlying tension. Decisions are influenced not just by what feels right, but also by how they will be perceived, whether they meet certain standards, and how they align with external benchmarks of progress. Even seemingly simple choices can carry an unexpected amount of psychological noise. As one's direction becomes more rooted in personal values, that noise starts to diminish. This doesn't mean uncertainty vanishes. Rather, the decision-making process becomes less cluttered by competing forms of external validation. There's a common quality to movement. A person no longer feels the same pressure to justify every decision, explain every preference, or turn every outcome into something that appears meaningful. Some choices start to feel resolved internally before they are fully articulated externally. This alters the emotional landscape of daily life. There's also a stronger sense of alignment between inner values and external structures. The life someone is living begins to feel less fragmented. Their time, attention, and energy are not being pulled as forcefully in opposing directions. This doesn't imply that life becomes effortless. Challenges persist, responsibilities remain. However, the friction caused by living in conflict with oneself starts to lessen. Effort feels more straightforward, less tangled with performance or self-contradiction. As a result, energy is experienced in a different way. When individuals operate solely under external pressure, a significant portion of their energy is spent not just on action, but also on maintaining psychological tension surrounding that action. They carry the weight of comparison, anticipation, self-monitoring, and often a quiet fear of falling behind. When those layers begin to ease, even demanding tasks can feel lighter, not because they require less effort, but because the effort feels more aligned internally. Another shift occurs in the perception of time. Time no longer seems to revolve solely around speed or accumulation. There's a diminishing obsession with relentless forward movement. People find themselves more capable of truly experiencing the present moment without the constant urge to transition to the next phase of life. This shift creates a new rhythm. Moments are less likely to feel merely transitional. Conversations, work, rest, and even solitude start to hold more significance because they are appreciated not just for their outcomes. There's also a reduction in performative urgency. An internally motivated person often becomes less reactive to societal pressures regarding visibility and comparison. They may still engage fully with the world, but without the same level of psychological dependence on external validation. This fosters a kind of calm that is hard to replicate from the outside. It's not indifference, but rather a sense of steadiness. Perhaps most importantly, there's an increasing sense of truly inhabiting one's life. Life stops feeling like something to be managed externally. Individuals begin to feel genuinely connected to their own choices, rather than just executing them. That sensation is subtle yet profound. Many forms of exhaustion stem not just from effort, but from the gap between the self and the life being lived. When that gap narrows, even just a little, a quietness emerges within, not perfect, not permanently resolved, but more authentic, more coherent, less fragmented. I believe that this coherence represents a deeper form of peace that people are genuinely seeking, even if they express it in various ways.
Why does living a truly self-directed life seem almost like a luxury in today's cultural landscape? Not in the conventional sense of wealth or prestige, but in the more subtle experience of it, the feeling of having enough inner clarity to navigate life without being constantly swayed by comparison, societal pressure, or outside expectations. What is it about this kind of inner calm, this ability to take charge of one's own focus and path, that makes it feel so rare and precious these days?
I believe it feels luxurious because it's becoming increasingly rare to live without constant interruptions from the outside world. Most people find themselves in environments that are always vying for their attention, interpretation, and emotional reactions. There's hardly any space where one isn't being influenced, compared, measured, or subtly nudged towards someone else's priorities. So, when someone starts to cultivate a more self-directed approach to their life, what they often reclaim first isn't dramatic freedom, but rather a continuity of focus. Their inner life becomes less scattered. And this fragmentation comes with a cause that many people no longer recognize because it has become the norm. The constant comparison, the ongoing adjustments, and the relentless exposure to external standards create a low but persistent psychological tension. Living a self-directed life eases that tension, not because external pressures vanish, but because they lose some of their power. A person stops feeling that every external cue must immediately dictate their identity or path. This fosters a sense of calm that feels rare precisely because it's not reactive. There's also something luxurious about reducing unnecessary self-negotiation. Many individuals expend vast amounts of energy trying to align who they are with who they think they should be. This internal negotiation occurs quietly throughout the day through choices, performances, social positioning, and even private thoughts. When one's direction becomes more rooted in their own values, some of that negotiation dissipates. Decisions start to be made with less internal conflict. Not because certainty is absolute, but because the connection between inner values and outer life becomes clearer. And that clarity feels profoundly restorative. Another reason it feels luxurious is that self-direction alters our experience of time. A person who is heavily influenced by external expectations often feels as though time is slipping away. There's always another goal to meet, another comparison to make, another urgency looming just around the corner. The present moment tends to feel like just a stepping stone away to keep up with the relentless pace. However, when life is approached with more awareness, time takes on a different quality. There's less pressure to turn every moment into evidence of progress. Experiences can be embraced for what they are, rather than just as milestones on the path to future approval. This change brings a sense of spaciousness, and spaciousness is something we rarely find these days. I believe that self-direction feels like a luxury because it restores a sense of sufficiency that our modern culture often undermines. Many external systems thrive on keeping people in a state of perpetual incompleteness, always striving, optimizing, refining, and comparing. There's always another version of oneself to chase after. Living a self-directed life disrupts that cycle, at least to some extent. Not by withdrawing from ambition or growth, but by fostering a quieter relationship with them. A person stops defining their identity solely through external validation. They start to find their worth in a more unconditional manner. Perhaps most importantly, self-direction enables a person to fully inhabit their own life. That might sound straightforward, but it's actually quite uncommon. Many individuals go through the motions of obligations, systems, and routines without truly feeling present within themselves as they navigate through them. A self-directed life helps to close that gap. The individual begins to see themselves more clearly within the framework of their daily lives, their choices, and their relationships. And I believe that recognition brings a deep sense of relief, not excitement. Not superiority, relief. The relief of no longer being swept along by a momentum that was never thoughtfully considered. In that light, the true luxury lies not in excess. Living with less internal fragmentation and performative pressure creates a quieter experience. It fosters a deeper sense that our lives are shaped from within, rather than being solely constructed from external expectations.
If someone took a moment to genuinely reflect on the structure of their life, not judging it or feeling the need to change it, but simply observing the patterns, responsibilities, aspirations, and rhythms that define their daily existence, what do you think they might start to notice over time? It's not just about what fills their life, but also about how they relate to the path they are currently on.
I believe people often first notice how much of life fades into the background due to repetition. Certain routines, obligations, and pressures can start to feel less like choices simply because they've been part of life for so long. The structure becomes so familiar that it's no longer something we consciously experience. When someone takes a moment to pause and observe closely, they might find that familiarity starts to separate from genuine alignment. They may discover areas where they continue acting out of habit rather than true conviction. Responsibilities that once held meaning may now feel like they're being upheld mostly by inertia. Or aspirations that still capture their focus, even though the emotional connection to them has diminished. This realization often comes in a subtle way. It's not about dramatic dissatisfaction, but rather a quiet acknowledgement that some aspects of life are being navigated more automatically than with intention. At the same time, they might notice something else. Certain elements of life can evoke a sense of expansion rather than contraction. Specific conversations, environments, rhythms, or types of work can create a feeling of internal harmony that doesn't require constant self-negotiation. These moments are significant because they highlight where one feels more fully engaged. I also think people start to recognize how much their path has been influenced by fear in very mundane ways. Not necessarily a fear of disaster, but rather fears of uncertainty, disapproval, irrelevance, or falling behind. These fears often creep into life quietly and become woven into practical choices until they seem entirely rational. But with careful observation, a person may begin to see how frequently fear has shaped their framework. It doesn't control every decision, but it subtly limits what feels acceptable to envision or pursue. There can also be an increasing awareness of the fatigue that comes from upholding identities that no longer feel fully alive within. People often think that fatigue is solely a result of workload, but exhaustion can also stem from the effort needed to stay psychologically connected to environments that no longer feel truly inhabited. Alongside these realizations, there can also be a sense of relief. Observation itself creates space. When someone starts to see their life more clearly, they no longer feel completely swept away by its flow. Even without immediate changes, there's a shift in how they relate to their circumstances. The structure of their life becomes something they can reflect on, rather than just something they continue to navigate unconsciously. I believe that distinction is significant. A self-directed life might not start with a complete overhaul. It could begin with a level of attention that allows one to recognize where their life feels genuinely true, where it feels imposed, and where they have gradually faded from their own choices without even realizing it. Perhaps that awareness, even before taking action, is already a step towards returning to oneself.
A self-directed life might not come from a dramatic overhaul. It could start much earlier, and in a more subtle way by being aware of where our direction is coming from, while life unfolds around us. Not every expectation placed upon us can be shed. Some responsibilities and constraints are simply part of being human. Yet, even within these limitations, we can still choose to pay attention. We can ask ourselves if the life we're living is truly being engaged with. That question might be more important than having all the answers. Self-direction doesn't necessarily mean controlling every outcome or crafting a flawless life. It could just mean being aware enough to see when we're letting momentum take over instead of being the authors of our own stories, and being quiet enough inside to hear what still feels authentically ours. In this way, freedom isn't always about leaving everything behind. Sometimes, it's found in the quieter act of being present in the life we're already living.